start with this. Well, Mike Coppinger tweeted, Errol Spence Jr.'s injury was a retinal detachment break. Nevada Commission's Bob Bennett tells ESPN upon reviewing the ophthalmologic exam conducted by Dr. Thomas F. Kelly on August 9th, Dr. Kelly determined Spence was unfit to compete. Lance Pugmire tweeted, Dr. Michael Davis, who performed the retinal tear surgery on Abner Mares, tells me the expected layoff for a retinal detachment break, like the one suffered by Errol Spence Jr., is 6 months to 1 year, compromising plans for a possible Manny Pacquiao fight opening in January. And this is what you expect in the sport of boxing. The news is fluid and ever-changing, where initially it was believed that the injury wasn't as serious or as severe as a detached retina, so much as a torn one. Come to find out, it's detached, and it could take Errol upwards of 6 months to a year to return to action.
There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there.
A lot of very cynical boxing fans who've grown distrustful of the sport over time, and they didn't gobble up the story straight away. They didn't believe it, that Errol was actually injured, and that's the real reason he pulled out. There are a lot of people that were convinced that there's more going on here than meets the eye, and what this might have been
strategy.
It's a play to perhaps get Manny Pacquiao on board for 2 pay-per-views instead of just 1. There are those people.
And it's a compelling theory.
You don't have to wonder if these strategic pullouts actually go on in the sport of boxing. They do. Just this week, Charles Conwell let the cat out of the bag that he was instructed to fake an injury by his guy, David McWater, so that he could fight on a different card for more money. It happens.
People fake injuries.
So is everyone right to assume that Errol Spence Jr. might be faking his injury? Well, I'll tell you this much. If it takes Errol Spence Jr. upwards of 6 months to a year to return to action, well, I'd have to say I wouldn't think he was faking then. I wouldn't be convinced of that, because that doesn't benefit him or the PBC in the least bit. If this opponent switch, this wife swap, as it were, doesn't result in a Spence versus Pacquiao fight in a timely fashion in the near future, should Manny beat Yordenis Ugas, if it doesn't happen that way and Errol Spence Jr. really ends up sitting out 6 months to a year, well, I'd be convinced that not only
is he really injured,
but he might be damaged goods. If it takes Errol Spence Jr. that long to recover, that long to recuperate, and he sits out for that duration of time, that doesn't bode well for what remains of his career. I vaguely recall Errol Spence Jr. once saying that he's here for a good time, but not for a long one.
Those words ring true today.
I mean, it doesn't benefit anyone for Errol Spence Jr. to sit out for that amount of time. It doesn't benefit anyone for Errol Spence Jr. to be out that long. So if he is out that long, it has to be because he's actually injured. And I reiterate, that doesn't bode well for what remains of his career.
So he suffered a detached retina in sparring.
Let's say that's the case. Let's say it's exactly the way they say it is, exactly the way it's being reported. Well, you know, I never liked Errol Spence Jr.'s chances at 154 pounds. I didn't. He might be on the generous end of the spectrum as far as welterweights go, but he'd be a small fry up there at 154 pounds. He hasn't proven to be all that big a puncher as a welterweight. So what kind of puncher would he be at super welterweight or junior middleweight?
If he sits out for that long,
does he even come back as a welterweight? Does he even retain those 2 alphabet titles, the IBF and the WBC? Seems like it's been a while since the IBF ordered Errol Spence Jr. to satisfy a mandatory. We know that Castillo Clayton and Sergey Lipinets, they fought, and, you know, their fight was scored a draw. And, you know, maybe that bought Errol Spence Jr. some time, but how long before the next IBF final eliminator? How long before it's ordered? And how much longer will Errol Spence Jr. be in possession of that red belt? I mean, even if the WBC is a bit more lenient than the IBF, you have to wonder, in 6 months to a year's time, will Errol Spence Jr. even be a champion in this division?
I wouldn't rush to assumptions
or jump to conclusions. This is one of those stories that has to tell itself. A healthy dose of skepticism.
It's always wise.
I mean, even Bernard Hopkins himself questioned the legitimacy of this story, the timing of everything, how it all broke down, and how it all happened. It doesn't hurt to ask questions. It doesn't hurt to question what you're being told. But if it does take Errol Spence Jr. that amount of time to return to action, it's safe to say that the injury was likely real.
I never thought Errol Spence would be a 3-division champion.
I didn't think he would go on to become that before the car accident, much less after. And with this new injury that he has suffered, this detached retina, that really drives that point home for me, as Errol Spence Jr. himself so adequately put it. Oh yeah, he's here for a good time, but not a long one.
This detached retina might be why.
Errol's no spring chicken, he's in his early 30s. How much time do you think the man has?
It's a grim prognosis.
In other news, per tweet from Michael Benson, Deontay Wilder trainer Malik Scotch has said he believes Dillian Whyte would be a stylistically tougher fight for Wilder than Anthony Joshua. AJ is a bigger target to hit, and by being better fundamentally, that makes him more vulnerable stylistically to get clipped by Deontay. If you think about this, Deontay Wilder, he generates his power through his straight shots. Bent arm punches really aren't his forte. Hooks, uppercuts, and things of that nature. Deontay Wilder's cannon right hand, as it were, is a straight right hand or a right cross. He needs room to throw it and additional space, to generate power. In that way, any fighter that tries to stay at arm's length of Deontay Wilder might be susceptible to that right hand. Anthony Joshua can fight long distance, but he can fight short distance, short range as well. He can bang on the inside. His money punch is an uppercut after all. And you have to be on the inside in order to get that punch off, in order to land it. So, maybe there's something to what Malik Scotch is saying, but this was a rather honest admission, if I do say so myself. The most honest admission I've seen from those guys on that side.
I've been saying this for years.
And I'm sure that many of you out there have been saying it yourselves. Dillian Whyte is all wrong for Deontay Wilder. That Dillian may have defensive lapses in judgment, deficiencies that can be exploited by an educated puncher like an Alexander Povetkin, for example, who landed a quality uppercut that only a quality operator could fire off and land. A very short punch. Deontay Wilder is anything but a short puncher, an educated one. He really is limited to that right-hand cannon. What other money punches does he have? He's never been that prolific a puncher, never been that busy.
Malik is onto something.
Anthony Joshua is a much more textbook boxer than Dillian Whyte. That goes without saying. He is a more fundamentally sound fighter, uses the lead hand, sets everything up with it. Everything is off the jab.
Dillian's got a jab, too.
She employed heavily in the Oscar Rivas fight and the first Povetkin fight. I think a lot of people conveniently forgot that, Dillian, he was jabbing Alexander Povetkin's head off in that first fight before Alexander knocked him out. But, Dillian's got a jab, though you could hardly accuse Dillian Whyte of being a jabber. He's a mid-range to inside guy when he's at his best. If he's having things his way, fighting the fight that he wants to fight, he's all in your wheelhouse, he's crowding you, and he's overwhelming you.
Stylistically, he'd be tough for Wilder.
If he's fighting that kind of fight, he would be, because Deontay Wilder relies on the straight right hand or the right cross to finish off his man, to finish off his opponent. And if by some chance Dillian Whyte gets around that right hand, under it,
he plays Wilder close to the chest.
Deontay Wilder's got no inside game, and with those long arms at that range, that distance doesn't really favor him. Both guys got pretty decent wingspan, but Dillian Whyte really is more prone to banging on the inside, close quarters, in the phone booth, in the pocket, whereas, Wilder, at his best, he needs room to throw and room to generate power. In close proximity to the other man, Dillian Whyte could give Deontay Wilder a lot of problems. It's neither here nor there, because I don't expect these guys to fight. There's an off chance that Tyson Fury might pull out of the trilogy the way that he pulled out on the Vladimir Klitschko rematch. That's a scenario that a lot of people are entertaining. Some people cited the recent health scare that Tyson Fury's newborn daughter had suffered as a reason that, he might decide to pull out of that Wilder fight and focus on his family. I saw those sentiments expressed. Tyson Fury himself says he's gone into a media blackout. He is now preparing for the trilogy this fall. And a situation like that, where the WBC title hasn't been contested in over a year's time, if Tyson Fury were to pull out of the fight, some people think the WBC would label him a champion in recess. The WBC title itself would go vacant, and an order from the WBC might come down for Whyte, their interim champion, and Deontay Wilder to fight for it. It's a very interesting scenario. It's very compelling. But even in a situation like that, I'm not convinced the fight happens. I think Wilder might withdraw, decide to set his sights on Andy Ruiz or one of his stablemates instead.
I don't know if this fight is ever going to happen.
Deontay Wilder's never seemed all that interested in fighting Whyte. The only time in recent memory that Deontay Wilder expressed an interest, and it was a fleeting interest, in facing Whyte was after Alexander Povetkin had already knocked him out.
Oh, yeah, of course he wanted to fight him then.
I wonder if by some chance things fall apart with Tyson Fury, would Deontay Wilder keep that same energy? Whyte is the WBC's interim champion after all. He's next in line. In other news, per tweet from Mike Coppinger and his sources, the PBC has signed Elvis Rodriguez to a multi-fight deal. The 140-pound prospect was released by Top Rank after an upset to Kenneth Sims Jr. in May. Al Hamion has already resurrected two fighters released by Top Rank, Andy Ruiz Jr. and Yordenis Ugas.
Big deal. They resurrected Jamal Herring and F.A. Ajagba.
You get the sense that even though Mike Coppinger is now reporting for ESPN, he still has ties, rather strings to pull.
Strings that can be pulled by Al Heyman.
You know, we talked about this in a previous video when this news first broke, that the people at Top Rank had cut Elvis Rodriguez from their Top Rank roster. And, you know, it happens. It sometimes happens after a loss. Anthony Sims was cut by Matchroom after he suffered his first professional loss, his first defeat, to Romer Angulio.
He had some choice words for Eddie Hearn.
He's very recently in action over there in Dubai against journeyman Hernan Perez. He has since rebounded off that loss to Romer Angulo early last year in January. It was Anthony's first fight in over 12 months' time. And you know, Anthony took it personal. Anthony wasn't happy about it.
Wasn't happy Matchroom let him go.
In the end, it's just business. It's not personal. But Anthony Sims took it that way. I wonder if Elvis Rodriguez doesn't share a similar sentiment when it comes to Top Rank, letting him go after what was only his first professional loss.
Washed up on the shores of PBC's Isolation Island.
They can use Elvis Rodriguez two ways primarily. They can use him to expand upon their 140-pound stable of fighters, it being that Josh Taylor, undisputed champion at 140, he could be moving up in weight very soon, and when he does, those titles might go vacant. Elvis Rodriguez can be positioned to catch one, so that the PBC can have another champion in their stable, or they can just use Elvis to fortify their welterweight stable of fighters.
Move him up to 147.
Because the PBC ain't got that many guys for Elvis to fight at 140 pounds anyway, but at 147, they have a stronghold and have had one over the years. We'll see which way they decide to go. In other news, by way of Mike Coppinger and his sources, WBC President Mauricio Suleiman tells ESPN he's ordered a middleweight title eliminator between Jaime Munguia and Sergey Derevyanchenko. Jamal Charlo is the champion. Purse bid will be ordered if no deal is struck by September 17th. Munguia has been in talks to fight Gabriel Rosario, and, you know, I don't think this order matters. I don't think Jaime is going to decide to back out of the talks he's been having to face Gabriel Rosario for Sergey Derevyanchenko.
Those talks for Rosado have already started.
If I'm being honest, I don't know how committed Jaime Munguia and his people are to fighting for a title in the next one or two fights. I don't know that they actually want to challenge Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade or anybody really for a title at middleweight. Jaime moved up to the middleweight division in January of last year when he locked horns with Gary Spike O'Sullivan. He has since fought at the weight 3 times.
This guy's got 37 professional fights.
Close to 40 fights. Close to 40. He's, 23, 24 years old. And look, when you got that many pro fights, I don't think a guy like Gabriel Rosado is who you need to be looking at. Just being honest. I think it has all the makings of what could be a fun fight, given that Gabriel Rosario is a tough Philly fighter. Guy who's been around the block. But, you know, Jaime Munguia, he actually held a world title at 154 pounds. He's currently at 160. He has close to 40 fights. I mean, when exactly do the training wheels come off?
He's been up there over a year.
He's had 3 fights at the weight, close to 40 fights total. He's a former champion at junior middleweight. I mean, at what point do they plan on hitting the gas? You have to start to ask yourself, when are Jaime Munguia's handlers going to feel confident enough to put him in title fights at 160 pounds? Because he can't do this forever. And at this point in his career, he doesn't need to be fighting the likes of a Gabriel Rosado. It's a pointless endeavor for Jaime Munguia. He was in a pole position to challenge Demetrius Andrade for Demetrius' WBO title not that long ago, and needless to say, it didn't materialize into anything. Demetrius ended up fighting Liam Williams instead of Jaime Munguia, even though they both fight on the same platform. Now he finds himself in a pole position to challenge for the green belt, the WBC title. And I know that there are obvious political boundary lines there to be addressed, but at minimum, he can position himself to fight for the title.
Because you never know, Jamal might vacate it soon.
You know, if Canelo Alvarez beats Caleb Plant and he decides to stay on PBC Island for one more fight, I could see him picking Jermall Charlo as a cherry, because that's what Jermall Charlo is to a Canelo Alvarez. He's a cherry. And if that happens, and Jaime Munguia, you know, let's say he beats Sergey Derevyanchenko, who hasn't rebounded off the loss to Jermall Charlo. Let's say it happens that way, you know, maybe Jermall vacates the belt, and maybe Jaime picks it up. I mean, he's got to do something. There's no reason for Jaime to still be fighting guys like Gabriel Rosado at this point in his career. Not 37 fights in.
He's getting away with it.